Do you struggle with watercoloring just like I do when you're making your card crafts? Join me today while we use the Altenew August 2023 release stamp set. We're using cupped flowers today, and we're focusing on this set because it has great bold images, perfect for doing a faux watercolor card, just like this one. I hope you have fun and learn something new while you're here. Now, the watercolor paper that I am using actually has what is called a tooth to it. And that just means that it has some texture so that when the finished product is done, it looks more like a watercolor painting. Now, I'm going to saturate the paper, and I do use a spritz bottle throughout this project, and as well as a large watercolor brush. Now, I do want to make sure that I don't have any huge puddles when I'm doing the stamping, but it is important that your paper is saturated. I am using the Green Meadows Fresh Dye Ink color group. I'm starting with the Minty Mint color and just stamping down the images of the leaves. Now, some of these leaves actually coordinate with a flower image in the stamp set, but I'm using them individually because it's going to be a very subtle background. You're not even going to be able to tell that it's missing the flower image. Now, this single stem of leaves does have 2 stamps to add in all of those leaves. I am going to be using the same color for those leaves just for the background, but you'll see how I'll use it for the foreground and the die cuts that I do later. Now I'm going to be adding in the veining using the Sweet Leaf color from the Green Meadows Fresh Dye Ink collection. Now, because the watercolor paper is saturated, when I stamp these on and it begins to dry, the ink is going to spread out and it is going to be just a shadow of the image, and the colors will become incredibly muted. So I'm now going to do it again, and I'm going to start this time with the Sweet Leaf color. And that way it has some of the leaves in the background and some of the leaves in the middle ground, and then the die cuts that I will put on top will be in the foreground. Now, even using the stamp wheel, these are going to come across as being incredibly random. I love using the stamp wheel because I can stamp multiple images at the same time, and then I'm not having to just continue to stamp and stamp and stamp, and then I kind of get lost on where my veining needs to go. So now I will be using just green for the veinings of this layer. And again, because the paper is saturated, it will blend out and it will be a very soft but vibrant background. I love this type of technique because it really gives you that artsy type of watercolor effect. And it even makes you appear to be a very talented watercolor artist. Watercolor class was always a huge struggle for me in art school. So using this technique with stamps, it really kind of makes me feel like I sort of know what I'm doing. And it's very easy to do. Now I'm going to take my watercolor brush with some water and just spread it over the top. I will take a paper towel just to make sure it doesn't go in a part that I wanted to stay white. And then I'm going to add some kosher salt to it. It's a little trick I did learn in the class that I took, and it will create some spotted spaces in my ink. Now I'm going to be creating the die cuts for the foreground, and using the double flower image, I am going to place it on my paper because I have the green leaves that need to be also stamped with it. So I'm setting it on there so that I make sure I have enough room for those leaves to go on there when I do my die cutting. I'm using pink pearl as well as coral bliss just along the edges, and then I'm going to spritz the stamp with water. The inks are going to meld together, and then when I stamp it, I'm going to hold it down for like 5 seconds, just so that the inks will absorb into the paper quickly. The single flower, I'm using Coral Bliss along with the Real Red watercolor brush marker. I do like to use the markers because I'm able to get the center of the flower instead of just the edges like I would with an ink pad. And again, I did spray it with some water. And I'm going back over it with just a little red because I want it to really bring out that color. I am going to use my heat gun just to dry the flowers quickly so I can move on. And there's an actual second piece to that second flower to fill in that white space there. It's just the fold of a flower. So I'm going to add that in with the Coral Bliss as well. Now I'm going to be lining up my leaves, and this time, because it's going to be in the foreground, I am going to use the Just Green ink from the Garden Meadows Fresh Dye ink set. And I will also be spritzing the stamp with the water. So it does stamp the image, but it makes it a little bit softer. Now, before I stamp the second set of leaves for that single stem of leaves at the bottom, I am going to put down my veining. That way, when I stamp the leaves after, they line up better. If I were to do it without the veining, I always mess it up and I never get it perfect. So I'm going to do the veining first, and then I will stamp the second set of leaves on that single branch. And I will be using, instead of the Just Green, I'll go back to the Sweet Leaf just so it has a little variety. And again, I'm always spritzing water on my stamp before I stamp it because I want that watercolor effect. After I finish these leaves, I'm going to move on to the centers. Now, the flower image with the two flowers has two separate centers for those flowers. And the one that I'm working on now actually also coordinates with the single flower image. So I'm going to be using buttercream for the first layer, and I will stamp that on. Then I will be using Sunkissed for the second layer of the flower center image. And that one has like the little speckles. It's really great. The third one, I will be using Orange Cream, and that is for the orange dot in the center of these flowers. These flowers to me look like a rose of Sharon. They have the flower, or the leaves of a rose, and they open up like those flowers. So I'm going to say these cupped flowers are a rose of Sharon. I will take them over to the die cutter. And now here's my background. You can see where the salt kind of made some really interesting things in the background. I'm going to add some splatters from my Altenew watercolor palette, and I will be using the Hunter Green first and then following up with the black because I plan on using my sentiment in black. Now, this stamp set also comes with wonderful, simple, beautiful sentiments and a coordinating die so that you can cut them out, which I will be using today. Now, this finished card is an A2 sized card, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 with the fold at the top. My sentiment I am going to be using from this stamp set, it is the thank you one along with its coordinating die. And I will be actually also using a strip from the Sentiment Strips stamp set, also from Altenew, to go along with it. Now, once I have everything arranged, I'm going to go ahead and glue down the background die cut with some liquid adhesive, and I'm using our handy press and seal wrap paper just so that I make sure everything is exactly where it was, since I painstakingly arrange flowers. In the foreground flower, I will be using the foam dimensional tape. Now, if you have not bought the Altenew fine blade scissors, that is a must tool in my arsenal. I used to have to soak my scissors in rubbing alcohol at the end of every day because I would have so much glue on those scissors. The glue from your foam dimensional tape does not stick to these scissors. They are amazing. I cannot praise them enough. Now for the sentiments, I will be using the Altenew Obsidian Black pigment ink. It is really wonderful. I just got it in finally, and I think it will be my new go-to black ink on everything. So I am going to use clear embossing powder on my sentiment because I want it to be really nice and shiny and pretty, and I feel that black powder kind of messes up the letters a little bit, so I always use the clear. Now, the die cuts from this set separates their sentiment. So it's a separate die cut for thank and then also for you. So I will be adding these to the front of my card using dimensional tape. I finished it off with the Green Meadows enamel dots. Now I really love this technique because it truly does look like I'm sending a piece of art in the mail to the person who receives this card. Thanks again for joining me. I am Kristin Sluhan with Paper Fiore. Be sure to follow and subscribe, and make sure you follow and jump on everyone else's video for this hop.